everybody can see the normal slide, correct? The beginning of the PowerPoint slide, the way that it should look.
Can everybody see that?
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hi, Holly.
Oh my gosh, Kurt, you're so weird. Okay, upcoming echoes. Gambling disorder. Ted Hartwell is coming back to us via Nevada. And then we'll have Shannon back from the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy to finish the part 2 of that, the PDMP talk. I'm going to miss a couple over the holidays so everyone can just, enjoy their families and such. And then the fun surprise is Wednesday, January 11th, Dr. Sanjeev Arora, who developed, of course, this whole Project Echo thing, is going to be coming back and giving us all the wonderful updated data with Hep C and all the treatments. And that will be the Echoversary. How cute was that? I just made that up.
Yeah.
5 years of this table.
Let's move on. All right. Remember, there's free CME. I think you all know how to get that now. Please feel free to turn on your video because I am sure Shannon would love to talk to a lot of faces. And so please do that. Remember, when you get the little questionnaire sent, you've got to fill that out to get your credits. So please do that.
All right. We're always here to help. Any kind of clinical question or workflow question or policy question, protocol question, let us know. That's how y'all can get a hold of us.
If it's real difficult, make sure you call me.
Or Erin,
Yeah.
She knows the answers.
Yeah, maybe Erin knows the answers.
Start with her.
Yeah, start with her.
All right. So the online site, this is where you can, register for echoes, although y'all made it here. So you know how to do that. If you want to watch any on playback, there's no CME for that. But if you missed one, that is where you can find it.
And remember, we have had a bit of a lapse in the Addiction Connection podcast for 2 weeks.
Due to illnesses.
We've had a number of illnesses with no voices. So our voices are back. We're doing it today.
Unfortunately, yours is back.
Yeah, mine is back. There's about 120 different topics on there. So feel free to check that out. And now we'll probably have something on psychedelic microdosing once we learn something. So.
Right. So with that, Shannon, I'll take down my slides. If you want to share yours. We are so grateful that you were able to join us for this topic. And I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you have a long list of things that I don't even know where to begin with. So.
Oh, you're muted still.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Now I'm going to be looking, I'm not on Twitter. I have a larger screen this way that I'm looking at. That's what I'm doing.
Ours are a little skewed, so we always look like we're looking in weird directions.
Yeah, I've got shifty eyes. I'm looking over at this other screen over here.
Really quickly, just so you're aware, people will chat questions in throughout. We can kind of help facilitate that at the end so you don't feel like you're like trying to monitor all of that simultaneously.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I do a lot of things and they're all related. I'm a certified rehabilitation counselor and have worked with folks with addiction my entire career. I'm a trauma-informed certified integrative medicine for mental health provider, a MAPS approved psychedelic integration provider. I've been a research fellow, an adjunct professor, and I also integrate spiritually transformative experiences and do some work on that, and have been working to decriminalize psychedelics in my state. And I do a ton of consulting and education work. I'm a visiting lecturer at universities to talk on this topic because it is there's just a lot that's unknown. And so I'm going to be sharing that today. And I love that we're doing this. I'm in Iowa. I live in Iowa on the land of the Sauk, Meskwaki, and Iowa people. And we have a lot of rural population. And for the longest time, I was the only psychedelic integration professional in our entire state and in 7 Midwest states. So I have been busy. And I'm going to share some research and stuff today, but some of you may have more information than I do because I'm kind of in the trenches with this stuff. I pop out and train every once in a while, but every time that I put my head down and get to work, there's like a new research study that's published. And someone's like, did you read that? I'm like, no, because I've been with people all day long. So we're going to learn a lot of things. This presentation should be like 17 hours long, and I am going to jam that into 1 hour. So if you start getting a little fight or flighty because the information is moving so fast, that is me and that is not you, because there's just a lot.
I think 17 hours would be fine. Everybody will stick with you.
But that being said, Shannon, if it's feeling fast to you, we have had this multiple times. If that means you need to come back 2, 3, 4, 17 times to get through it,
Yes.
by all means, because sometimes it's just like so much information nobody can process. So
It's so much information, and it's just unfolding. It's an exciting time, really, because we have access to so many resources and models. And I love that there's a task force that is putting it together, because we need this in rural places. So here's the big deal. Here's the deal: is the psychedelic movement never went away. It just went underground. Okay, so this work has been going on for thousands of years. It just went underground. And because it went underground and there was this whole war on drugs, things have gotten a little bit riskier for folks, because when things are illegal, then access to information and safety and trauma-informed care and harm reduction is reduced. And so I hope today to be able to give a little bit more information to keep folks safe. So I practice from the integrative medicine for mental health model. I'm not going to go into this, but what I love about how I practice trauma-informed care is I fill the gaps where a lot of system failures and opportunities occur. And so I like to be a system bridge builder, and that's why I'm here today, because I truly believe in the work that everyone is doing to try to keep people safe. And so this is because people have never heard about integrative medicine for mental health where I'm from, even though it's very common, like in California and Colorado. I'm the only practitioner that practices the way, so I didn't want to show kind of where that fits within the different systems. And so this is where I got my training as a certified integrative medicine mental health provider. I started to learn about altered states and psychedelics and entheogens. I'm a psychedelic user myself for my own mental health. And this is where I got my training. And so this is kind of the approach that I look at as a whole self, which kind of does look more like a very integrated model. And to find more folks like me, you can look at immh.org. There's a lot of psychiatrists, doctors, and counselors across not only the United States, but across the world that practice in the way that I do. Where just in my line of work, psychedelics are just very natural. It's a natural treatment option. And I'm so glad that we're actually having this conversation today to kind of destigmatize what is microdosing. So what are psychedelics? Psychedelics are a class of hallucinogenic drugs in sacred plant medicine sacraments whose primary effect is to trigger non-ordinary states of consciousness. And so I look at this model as to heal, we have to heal from a higher state of consciousness than to which the trauma or the wound was originally created. And this creates that spaciousness, can create it if the right elements are in place. So it causes specific psychological, visual, auditory changes, and often substantially altered states of consciousness. The term psychedelic was termed by Humphrey Osmond in 1957. Psyche means mind, delos means manifesting. And so you can conceptualize it as mind manifesting and impacts human experiences understanding. We are meaning-making beings, and so psychedelics can help make meaning through non-ordinary states of consciousness. From the Greek term entheos, it means the God within, and gen means the act of becoming. So an entheogen is generating the experience of the God. Healing within. So plant sacraments or shamanic inebriants invoke religious ecstasy or visions, and it's becoming the divine within. And what is microdosing? There's actually no shared term as to what microdosing even is. How confusing is that? Right? What is it? So what we can agree on is microdosing is a subclinical dosage, so 1/20th to 1/10 of a standard psychedelic therapeutic dose, which we are determining that now because research is now available. It's back. The suppression of psychedelic research has now been made available. So there's a long, rich history of psychedelics and microdosing within the human within humanity. And so we can, within recorded history, trace it back to 1000 BC. with mushroom stones. And then this was given to us by the Mazatec. And then there's 10,000 BC, the oldest known petroglyph depicting the use of magic mushrooms and the mushroom shaman. So we actually have these as artifacts as to see, oh yes, these medicines and sacraments have been with us for a very, very long time. So you can find these pictures on caves in the Sahara. And so I love finding these artifacts, and there's places where they're stored to look at them, to just look at the rich history. So there's been a rich history actually of microdosing dating back to 1520. So low doses of psilocybin were used by the Spaniards. And sadly, what's happened across the world is due to colonization in South America was colonized by the Spaniards. What happened there and what happened in North America very much mirrored one another, because then not only the suppression happened over 400 years ago in South America, which happened in North America. Spaniards came over, colonized, took the medicines away from the indigenous people, used them for themselves. And again, this is happening and has been happening here today. And so that's why I am an advocate of decriminalization, because we have thousands of years of what I would term as clinical research done by indigenous folks as to how to apply safety protocols and indigenous wisdom, which is not being taught like in clinical settings, as to the rich wisdom that already exists within our species. And usually what happened was that with indigenous communities, these psychoactive plants were actually used in the context of community-based ritual. That is not how we do healing in the West. And it's not part of the context, which is where I see a lot of psychedelic traumas, because it's not part of the nomenclature. There is no community healing. There are no rites and rituals. And a lot of folks that use psychedelics, especially in the rural Midwest, can't share their stories with other individuals because they're pathologized, and there's no understanding within our culture as to just the rich history and beauty within these wonderful, beautiful plants and fungi. So traditional indigenous psychedelic spiritual practices, so the North American church practices in the US Southwest, and there's deep entheogenic ritual there. Mexico has a deep, rich history. Ayahuasca ceremonies within the interior Amazon region, and the Shipibo in Peru have a beautiful ayahuasca tradition that has now they're even in Costa Rica. And there's been mushroom cults of Siberia. So there's a rich history, and there's a lot of churches, and what the common themes are spiritual, sacred, and therapeutic. So I include indigenous wisdom as evidence-based research. In my mind, it's been orally passed down, and just because it wasn't written down in some languages, written language isn't recorded. And that still, to me, is evidence-based. It's just been lost and suppressed. So there's actually psychedelic religious use within the Christian tradition. So ancient Greece and the beginning of Christianity, in the book, The Immortality Key. If you haven't read this, go and get this book today. Oh, The Secret History of Religion with No Name. It shares the deep, deep history of the very beautiful traditions of psychedelic use within the Christian faith, and that can be traced back with artifacts. It's beautiful. And so another book is the Psychedelic Gospels that are just wonderful. So I asked this question: was the apple of Eve actually a psychoactive mushroom called Amanita muscaria? We can look this up in the Psychedelic Gospels. It goes deep into it. And there's evidence for entheogens in the Holy Communion, in the Eucharist. Isn't that neat? So the history of psychedelics and microdosing. So what happened? So if you watch any shows on Netflix, this information is being uncovered. A lot of people are like, Shannon, I saw this on Netflix, and so I don't need this information. Of course, it's so much part of our culture right now. So there's history of psychedelics and microdosing. Albert Hofmann synthesized LSD. This came from, he synthesized So synthesizing it is taking the natural substance and studying its compound and then creating a man-made chemical. So Westerners started going down to Mexico, South America, and started bringing or doing plant medicine experiences and then studying the compounds and then started synthesizing them. That's the shortest summary. And so Albert Hoffman created LSD. There's wonderful, beautiful studies that are coming out, LSD being so helpful for anxiety. And then it started becoming, since folks from North America started to go down to South America, started becoming more of the culture in North America after Aldous Huxley published The Doors of Perception. And then psychedelics got studied and discovered in the West after Life magazine put the story of mycologist and banker. He was not a true, I actually have to be careful with these words because there's a lot of dissent within the psychedelic community. He was an amateur mycologist who traveled to Mexico and took magic mushrooms with a Maria Sabina, a shaman. And this is how psilocybin became more known in America. Sadly, because he published this information in the West, Maria Sabina ended up living destitute, and everything was kind of taken from her family because of Western appropriation of the medicine. So there's just a lot of people are so excited right now about the opportunities to heal, because we are in a mental health crisis, we are in a trauma crisis, but we also have to look to the rich history as to the horrors of the things that have happened with the psychedelics being appropriated by the West and the indigenous communities being torn away from the sacred sacraments. And so Ram Dass, he started the Harvard Psilocybin Project with Timothy Leary. And then in 1968, the Nixon administration did what it did. And you can hear former Nixon policy chief recorded saying, so the war on drugs was manufactured, it was intentional, and it was shut down. And here's why. On tape, you can hear, you want to know what this war on drugs was really about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and LSD and Blacks with heroin, both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know that we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. So the war on drugs in the United States was manufactured, and this halted research for the last 40 years, except for MAPS, who kept going, and a couple researchers in clinical settings, they kept going, and thankfully they did. But what happened with this is now we had all those commercials on the war on drugs and the Reagan administration and all of that. So now it's in this collective psyche as to drugs are bad. People who use drugs are bad. And this was intentional. Okay. And so everyone here who is serving people who use drugs knows what the stigma is. And this is where I am going to talk about harm reduction and trauma-informed care. So in 1976, Albert Hoffman gave an interview with Times and mentioned microdosing. And so even though it was suppressed, of course, counterculture, it went underground. And so psychedelic users still shared information in the means that they could. MAPS was formed, and they have done a ton of research. Terence McKenna published the book Food of the Gods and Stoned Ape Theory. And then in 2001, things took a turn in Portugal. Portugal decriminalized both the personal use and possession of all drugs. They set up drug treatment centers and universal health care. They have amazing outcomes. To me, it's a best practice is what Portugal has done. And we really still need to study that because we're not doing great in the United States, even though some things are changing. Portugal, obviously it's a totally different culture, but they really understand the need for the drug treatment centers and the universal health care wrapping around within the whole deployment of the decriminalization movement. In 2019, the FDA approved esketamine spray, and so it's legal across the United States. And so we have had legal psychedelics since 2019 in the United States. In 2019, Denver, Colorado became the first city to decriminalize psilocybin. And then just recently, they passed a ballot initiative in Colorado to decriminalize and possess psychedelic mushroom and fungi and some other plant psychedelics for folks 21 and above. And so they put together a task force, and they're going to deploy that in the next coming years as to what that's going to look like. Okay, so that's a little bit about the history. Fast forward to today, we just traversed thousands of years. How are we doing? That's a lot of history. I didn't do it well because there's a lot of things that are missing, and people are going to be like, Shannon, but you didn't mention this, that, or the other. We got an hour. And Netflix is going to go look at any sort of information that's coming out on Netflix and the documentaries. This is going to have a ton of information so you can catch up and just as to the history. Why are folks microdosing? High rates of mental health conditions, trauma, and lack of purpose and meaning. Folks are in an existential crisis, especially after 2020. What does it all mean? And they're looking for more. A lot of folks want to treat their depression and anxiety, ADHD, mood disorders, PTSD, and addiction naturally. That's informed consent. They don't like the approach of the traditional medical model, and they want a natural solution, or they want a psychedelic solution. They may not be able to access macrodosing or psychedelic assisted therapy or shamans due to cost or legality. There's also a lot of health insurance barriers because of step therapies that they're required to access psychedelics and non-trauma informed therapist protocols, or they're on medications. A lot of folks can microdose and be on medications, and so it's not a barrier for them to start access healing. Folks, it's the impulse of the human condition to want to heal and be whole. It is an impulse, and folks are saying, hey, I watched a show on Netflix, they use psychedelics, I am too. So they can microdose while on SSRIs or SNRIs. There's no research to explore the safety, but microdosing likely is safe based on pharmacology of psilocybin and LSD. Large doses will blunt these effects of a micro and a macrodose. Macrodose is a larger dose. People are seeking spiritual experiences or spiritual growth. The traditional medical model doesn't fit or hasn't worked for them. It's not culturally competent for them. Can't access mental health care. So many folks cannot. There may be a distrust in mental health and healthcare professionals. And a lot of folks are microdosing for creativity, flow states, performance, and leadership development. Silicon Valley is microdosing. All the programmers that run social media, not all of them, but a lot of them are microdosing. And they're writing blogs about microdosing and how. And so this information, we are in a interconnected worldwide web of interconnection, quite literally, and sharing our stories with one another. Why are we microdosing continuing? It's a way to dip your toes into the psychedelic water before doing a full cannonball into a full big experience. It's from a trauma-informed lens, it's safer in my mind to go slowly into a large dose. You can retain some sense of control before completely letting go. It improves relationships, and empathy can improve if the conditions are set and it works with you. I say these terms very broadly. Please, someone don't take this information and be like, okay, I'm ready to go. No. We need to do more investigation. For energy and athletic performance and athletic coordination, athletes are microdosing. Aaron Rodgers came out with he macrodosed with a ayahuasca, but folks are doing it. This is part of the social story. It usually requires less integration support and less jarring effects. So you can carry on with daily activities because it's not going to give you the visual and the hallucinatory effects. If it is, it's a little bit more than microdose. You're probably the doses are pretty too high. Can macrodose at any time of the day, adjust the dosage more effectively, and can be able to experiment and track dosages. To me, it's more trauma informed to be able to match the dosage with what you're dealing with. Their friends or peers are microdosing, and more information is being shared in our social story about microdosing. It's more part of the narrative. And we are an interconnected species at this point because of the internet and what folks are doing in the Amazon, and when they're going on vacation in Costa Rica. Now, I'm looking at that today, and now I'm curious, and now I'm interested. Where and how are folks accessing psychedelics? So there's ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and psychedelic-assisted therapy where it's legal. Cannabis, MDMA is going to be here soon. Retreat centers across the world that are operated by indigenous shamans and plant medicine facilitators. An example is Solterra, Costa Rica. Indigenous and spiritual spaces, legally defensible churches like Soul Quest in Florida. That's a big place where people go. Research studies, so MAPS to other universities, also research hospitals, and underground and on their own. This is probably what you're encountering, folks doing underground and on their own. So there's shamans in the suburbs doing weekend retreats, all suburbs across the United States at this point. This is happening. They're growing their own psilocybin and magic mushrooms. They're ordering through the dark web and buying with cryptocurrency. They're ordering through shamans, growers, and producers online at parties and festivals, and they're getting them from someone through an integration circle, online, or a psychedelic city club. This is happening all over, all over. Who is microdosing and macrodosing? Everybody. This whole slide says, I'm summing up everyone, every political belief, every spiritual belief, parents, mothers, single folks, elders, atheists, spiritual folks, doctors, therapists, CEOs, clinicians, working professionals, consciousness explorers, folks dealing with mental health conditions and trauma, those with ends of life aim, psychedelic advocates, indigenous peoples since the beginning of time, and anyone open, anyone that can access them, and or anyone that's profoundly struggling. Folks often come to psychedelics when they are considering suicide. I see this all the time. They are at the end of the rope. They're at their edge. They're willing to try anything. See it every day, every day. So we've got some common microdosing schedules. What I'm going to tell you, these are some schedules as to how folks are microdosing, but there's no research as to what is the right schedule for someone, okay? That's still being researched and depends. It is so complex. This work is so complex that we have to be very nuanced. And that is not for today because this is a crash course in microdosing. So you've got a 1 day on, 2 day off schedule. You got a 4 day on, a 3 day off. You got it every other day, every fourth day or twice weekly. This is Fodman's protocol. There's a PRN or a perfect Sunday. Microdosing every day is not recommended. Off days reduce effects of tolerance that can build up over time and needing higher doses. It gives a chance to process on the off days to work through the emotions that are coming up without psychedelics. It can also be helpful to take an off week, an off month. There's no specific regimen. This is TBD. To be discovered, to be continued. What psychedelics are being microdosed? Cannabis is being microdosed. LSD, an analog designer drug. That's the chemical compound. Designer drugs. There's so many analog psychedelics that people are accessing. Magic mushrooms are psychedelics. Iboga. Others are mescaline, ayahuasca, ergine, LSA, and various analog designer and recreational psychedelics. Many, many. Okay, so how to deliver. Here's another, again, microdosing amount, 0.05 to 0.3 grams. Can be considered a microdose. Takes some experience and trial and error. Some people may be larger. Some people may be smaller. Folks are grinding them up, putting into a powder capsule, or they're eating mushrooms raw, or they're chewing mushrooms dried, or they're putting them in tea, chocolates, gummies, tinctures, commonly combined with the elements of nature, as did indigenous folks and some of our ancestors. Turmeric, black pepper, dried mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms like reishi. These are medicinal mushrooms as well. Chaga, cordyceps, ginger root, adaptogens, honey, lemon, and vitamins. People are making adaptogen blends. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. Now here's an older study about the benefits and challenges with microdosing. And there's a newer study. So there was some improved mood, reduced symptoms, creativity, social benefits, cognitive benefits, improved energy, improved focus, reduced anxiety, self-efficacy, psychological enhancement. This is in 2019 that this came out. And then the challenging pieces were the illegal nature, social interference, the discomfort, cognitive interference, then increased anxiety. So for one person, it decreased, another one, it increased. Impaired mood, increased symptoms, impaired energy. I will say if people have trauma history or mental health conditions, it's going to increase more of the root causes of that and what would be considered like the challenges of that. And that's just where I really, 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 really recommend integration support and trauma-informed care. So then new research was published in June 30th, and this even showed greater improvement. So this was the largest microdosing study that's ever been done, showed greater improvements in mood, mental health, and psychomotor abilities. So the study was 953 people, microdosed and 180 did not. That's a good research study when we have, folks that are not using the medicine. It was the largest longitudinal study of its kind. And they specifically found this shocked me. I'm continually shocked by some of this research. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. So specifically found improved mood, reduced symptoms of depression, anxiety, stress, and particularly in those age of 55 or older. I thought that was fascinating. So this project is microdose.me project. It's the world's largest mobile microdosing study. If you want folks to feel like they want to get involved in the research, they can get involved. This is an online study that's ongoing, and I would invite folks to go there. So we have microdosing programs. There's online microdosing programs, and here they are: trip sitters, double blind, psilocybin mushroom retreats from Third Wave, and psychedelic integration professionals. MAPS used to have everyone on there that did integration, but they are now focused totally on research. And so that was handed over to Psychedelic Support Network. I'm part of the Psychedelic Support Network, and this is where you can find people that are like me that can help people integrate their microdosing and macrodosing experiences and keep them safe. Everyone on there should be doing some harm reduction on the front side, because it's not only just integrating. I spent a lot of time on the front side with someone to make sure like everyone is totally, totally safe to move forward with microdosing and macrodosing. Okay, so emerging issues as I see them and opportunities with microdosing. So there's limited microdosing research and millions of people are suffering profoundly. Western society has done a terrible job at psychedelic education. We continue to do a terrible job because of the suppression of information and this psychological misinformation that has come through the war on drugs. Folks saw so many of those commercials that they believed this information to be true, even though it is not. Drug users are not scary people, and psychedelics can be healing. They're not for everyone, of course not, but they are for some people. And I'm here for those that we make sure that they're safe and integrated and supported. Psychedelics outcomes are dependent on dosages, intention, underlying mental health states, trauma histories, setting, environment, education, legalization, and support. When we have those things in place, we have the highest outcomes. Where we're seeing outcomes being low, those elements are not in place. Much of what is being reported as outcomes comes from solo user-based experiential research and contains placebo effects and or anecdotal evidence. When some big name person writes a expose or does they do a TV show or they write a book, that's not you. If this person is wealthy and they've done all of the assessment and they have all the support in the world, that is not you living in a rural area, living in poverty, not having any support and trying to do it on your own. Okay, so folks they're grasping for stuff right now because we're not okay as a species, and there's so much information out there as to what to do, and people, they just want to have a little bit of hope. And most folks, quite honestly, do not know what they're actually treating and may not have the support for trauma to resurface when self-administering psychedelics. A lot of times folks are like, this person did it and they felt better, so I'm going to do it. So I want to feel better. It takes a little bit more nuance than that to really, really treat the root causes of what's going on. Most folks do not know how much they're taking. They don't have a scale to measure. They don't know how much is beneficial, and they take some, and that's not great. The outcomes aren't going to be great. Just taking a handful. I just took a handful of mushrooms. Oh my God. How much was in there? How many grams was that? That's not a microdose. You're on a journey. This is going to last for 6 to 8 hours. Are you prepared for that? So, and then healthcare professionals and therapists are largely uneducated or still have not deconditioned from the war on drugs themselves. Look, I live in Iowa, and there's a lot of therapists in my area who are not a fan of what I'm doing, but there are some that are, and that are safe for people to go to. And I'm willing to talk to anyone about this. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm just trying to keep people safe. Psychedelic personal outcomes are dependent on the type of medicine, the dosage, the underlying physical and mental health states, the trauma history. Drug testing kits should always be available if receiving psychedelics or any drugs from underground sources. Oh, I could do a TED Talk rant on this whole one right here. My state, Iowa, does not allow fentanyl testing strips. Governor won't allow it. Folks are going out and they're getting opioids, anxiety medicines, wherever they're getting it, and it's laced with fentanyl, and yet we cannot test. That is a travesty. It's a problem, and we need to put legislation in place. And so I am adamant that drug testing kits are available for all humans. Drugs are part of humanity. I'm off my soapbox, back to the presentation. We also need to make sure folks are prepared, that medication and substance use has been discussed, evaluated, that there's a mindset or set, including social conditioning. There is a lot of psychedelic traumas that I see go from just a Western mindset into non-ordinary reality and not having any sort of tools or language, culture, ideas about what diving into your soul is looking like in an ayahuasca ceremony, what non-ordinary reality looks like. It can jar someone and give them PTSD if they are not prepared for that, or they don't have a place to discuss that, or their friends and family have this idea that they just did some drugs and they don't understand it, and they're kind of projecting their beliefs. When someone's trying to heal their trauma, they're going to do what they're going to do, right? So sometimes it can be really, really messy in rural parts of the country where folks don't even have one safe person to share their psychedelic experience with. It can become really harmful for that person to heal when they have nobody to talk to. I see this over and over again. So the social environment which the user has experience or setting is super important. It's different if you have it at a party versus out in nature, like different setting. Or like, I didn't even know what it was. Shane, I didn't know what I took. I was at a party. I wanted to fit in. I don't know what it was. So not having non-ordinary reality skill set, somatic skill set, breath work, meditation. I love VR simulations, previous therapy work to be able to open up Pandora's box of your soul and what may be uncovered. We really have to have tools for that, because it can be literally Pandora's box that's being opened. Psychedelics work off your intention. And some folks' intention is way too big and the experience is way too overwhelming. Personal and professional support has to be there. Otherwise the outcomes are lowered. Community has to be there. People have to have a psychedelic community that they're part of so they can share these experiences, because humans have been trying to make meaning since the beginning of time. And the immortality key says that religion was created from psychedelic use. And that is where the concept of God came from. And folks have been trying to discover, who are we? Who am I? The deepest, most fundamental existential question of our time. We need to have a safe space for people to uncover and answer those questions. And then legalization and decriminalization has to happen. Why? Because there is no cultural education without decriminalization. Just like we have conversations and resources for alcohol use because it's legal, right? And so we can have that conversation with our youth as to like responsible and safe. We can't have that right now because it's decriminalized. It's too taboo. It's too taboo for me to even talk about it, except for safe spaces like this, right? Because if I go on to a Facebook Live to my community, they're like, Shannon, what is going on here? This is not, you shouldn't be talking about these things. Our collective outcomes depend on same thing, pick up where personal outcomes, leave off legalization, decriminalization, drug testing kit access, education, alcohol and drug treatment center access, Health insurance funder involvement. This is being missed in the decrim movement. More evidence-based research. Indigenous practitioners being included in on all psychedelic conversations, therapies, and consulting. This is being missed. There's been thousands of years of research that is not being applied. Someone goes and gets a certificate program from some university for 1 year, never had a psychedelic experience, and they're going to guide someone through non-ordinary reality and integrate that and keep somebody safe? I don't think so. That's not our highest outcomes. Our highest outcomes are by working with the folks that have been doing this for thousands of years. And then including harm reduction model and trauma-informed care. So I'm using SAMHSA's trauma-informed care. I've worked on SAMHSA grants in the past. It's my favorite model. Obviously, you all know what this model is: safety, trustworthy, and transparency, peer support, collaboration, and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, cultural, historical, and gender issues. I'm not going to go into that, but know that that's the model that I'm working from. I am going to go into harm reduction 101. Harm reduction goes along with trauma-informed care. It's a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences with drug use, as drug use is a part of life. Harm reduction is also a movement for social justice built on the belief in and respect for the rights of people who use drugs. It incorporates a spectrum of strategies that include safer use, managed use, abstinence, meeting folks who use drugs where they're at, and addressing conditions of use along with the use itself. There is no universal definition or formula for implementing harm reduction, as the interventions and policies are designed to serve folks who use drugs and reflect specific individual and community needs. I'm saying that very slowly. Even though it's a model, I'm calling it a flexible model because it has to be peer-focused, community-based, deployed at the level of community that you're serving, which is what you're doing, right? You're serving rural communities. So here's some flexible principles. Accepts, for better or worse, that illicit and illicit drug use is part of our world and chooses to work to minimize its harmful effects rather than simply ignore or condemn them. Understands drug use as a complex, multifaceted phenomenon that encompasses a continuum of behaviors from severe use to total abstinence, and acknowledge that some ways of using drugs are clearly safer than others. Establishes quality of individual and community life and well-being, not necessarily cessation of all drug use, as a criteria for successful intervention and policies. And calls for the non-judgmental, non-coercive provision of services and resources to people who use drugs and the communities in which they live in order to reduce harm. So ensures that people who use drugs and those with a history of drug use routinely have real voice in the creation of programs and policies designed to serve them, and affirms people who use drugs themselves as the primary agents of reducing the harms of their drug use, and seeks to empower people who use drugs to share information, support each other in strategies which meets their actual conditions of use. It's peer-led. This is peer-led, not clinician-led, not service provider-led. This is peer-led. They're going to understand the best out of anyone. They're your teachers as to how to deploy the safest strategies. They're talking to each other anyway, so go with what's going on. Recognize the realities of poverty, class, racism, social isolation, past trauma, sex-based discrimination, and other inequities affecting both people's vulnerability to and the capacity for effectively dealing with drug-related harm. And it does not attempt to minimize or ignore the real and tragic harm and danger that can be associated with illicit drug use. I get a lot of pushback on harm reduction by a lot of clinicians who don't understand this population. And I'm always asking them to get more training and really listen to the folks that they're serving, really listen to their stories. They are your teachers. So from a macrodosing standpoint, a macrodose is a clinically effective dose. There's more information on larger dosages. There just is, just from a historical and a clinical lens. So here I've listed out the different dosages, okay? From micro to the ultra high dose. These are just broad dosages, not exact, but we go from a micro to an ultra high dose or a heroic dose. My mantra is start low, go slow, more trauma informed. Okay, so there's a lot of therapy research and the populations as to who it's benefiting. So we want to match up the medicine with what someone's working with, okay, as far as a mental health condition. And so right now I'm basing this on research. Psilocybin is for anxiety, depression-related anxiety to terminal illness, alcohol dependence. LSD is anxiety to terminal illness, tobacco use disorder. There's obviously way more use cases in this. Research was blocked for 40 years and now it's coming back. And so even as I speak this out today, there's probably been a research study that says, no, it's beneficial for these folks. Medical cannabis for PTSD, ayahuasca, decline in alcohol, tobacco, cocaine use, and problematic cocaine use. It's been shown that MAPS research showed that. Iboga and ibogaine is my favorite for opioid addiction and alcohol use disorder. I love it. I'm an advocate for it. Please, 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 we need more of it. MDMA is for PTSD. In 2 years from now, we're going to have more MDMA access approved through the FDA, and I cannot wait for it. Such an effective modality for PTSD. Going to turn the whole mental health system on its head. Based on, and folks are just going to be lining up because it is just so beautiful. Ketamine for major depressive disorder, bipolar, PTSD, suicidal ideation. It's also used for OCD. And right now, only ketamine-assisted therapy is legal. Then I wrote this a couple months ago, and as of next year, more things will be legal. So here's some of the research. And so just for you to dive through to know, like, this isn't just stuff I'm picking off of blogs. This is clinical-based research. What are the effects of psilocybin and what are the potential adverse effects? Some tools you can use. I'm going to pop through this. LSD, the same. What are the benefits and then what are some of the negative effects? MDMA, same thing. Ketamine, here we go. Some research into psilocybin, its effectiveness for depression and anxiety. So here's the research that you can dive into and just absorb and just look at the populations and just savor and study. MAPS is doing a ton of research, and so is the VA. VA is pro psychedelic assisted therapy. I love it. They're actually doing the first like group psychedelic assisted therapy, and I am here for it. The reason I exist in the mental health world is because my grandfather had untreated PTSD from a war, and it got me really curious as to trauma-informed care. Tore my family apart, and I'm so glad that so there's so many solutions for veterans. If you're working with veterans right now, there are so many solutions right now through grants, programs that they can access psychedelic assisted therapy right now today. Cool research. Lifetime use of certain psychedelics shows, this is another shocker, in a national survey over 190,000 adults, lifetime use of certain psychedelics associated with a 19% reduced likelihood of psychological distress within the past month, 14% reduced likelihood in suicidal thinking, 29% reduced likelihood in suicide planning, and 36% reduced likelihood in attempting suicide in the past year. That's cool. And that totally goes against all the things that we've been told about psychedelics. That kind of refutes some of the just misinformation that's been floating around. I put in some other popular psychedelics as folks are accessing all of them all over the place. Yes, even in rural Midwest America, this is happening. And some of them are really beautiful. For certain situations, they're all beautiful for that certain situation. And it's so peyote, 5-MeO-DMT, bufo the toad, the god molecule, beautiful DMT, spirit molecule, which is ayahuasca and DMT, ibogaine and iboga, love it for alcohol use, salvia, morning glory. And if you want to go to Wikipedia and see all the psychedelics that exist, there's like 100 and more coming because the entrepreneurs are getting into the space and they're creating a bunch of fancy psychedelics that are going to be used for this, that, and the other. So buckle up. If you don't think that this is happening in your community, if you think this like, oh, you're going to be hearing about this so much for the rest of your lives. It's here to stay. Folks are accessing it everywhere. It's back. So I put in the trip lengths as folks are not prepared for how long it goes and what the nature of the trip is like. So I put that in there because folks are like, it went on forever. Yeah, of course it did. Space and time are removed and you're in non-ordinary reality. And on this side, in the 3D world, these trips can be pretty long. DMT is shorter. Salvia is a really short experience. Peyote is short, but it could be, all these things can be so mind blowing, and they have reactivation, some of them, that there's no quick fix. Folks think that psychedelics are a quick fix. Oh no, get ready to work the hardest you've ever worked in your entire life, because it's going to bring up all this stuff, your trauma, your ancestral trauma, collective trauma, and then alternate realms of reality. Is someone prepared for that? Are you prepared to see machine elves with the DMT experience and then kind of go to work the next day and just kind of be chill about that? No, it's going to blow your brain. So MAPS has completed a ton of research study. I invite you to go to their website and just spend a whole day there and just see all the research, because it's coming out, and the research is beautiful. NIH, I get folks into research studies that can't access it anywhere else. The research studies have a lot of limitations, but for some folks, it's the only way to access trauma-informed care. And sadly, sometimes they only do like one dose of something, and they may need more, and someone feels like they failed at psychedelics and they can't heal. So I see a lot of those folks because it's missing, and they miss the ritual, they miss the indigenous elements, and a lot of times they quite frankly miss the trauma-informed care in some of these research settings. And a lot of clinical settings, a lot of ketamine clinics are missing it. They're bombing. So here's how to support someone: preparation, dose the medicine, match it to their mental health state, make sure they're testing, talk to them about the psychedelic state. As soon as you decide to use psychedelics, you're in a psychedelic state, stuff's coming at you as far as healing. It's going to be extreme, which in a psychedelic state can last hours, days, months, and years after the psychedelic experience is integrated. This is why people look like they're, things are not going well. No, the information hasn't been processed and integrated into their life. And so it can be a little bit tricky. Setting mindset, very specific and realistic intentions, the environment, and wraparound support. The number one rule of psychedelic use: you may get the message when using psychedelic to kill yourself. That is a message from your soul, your spirit, your life force, that is to surrender to the experience, not to literally, oh, we've done so much harm by taking soul symbols literally. And this is what has happened when we have taken indigenous wisdom out of sacred sacraments. We apply the left brain, Western logical mindset, and things get very, very tricky. Integration of macro and microdosing can be lifelong. Let people know, oh, I wanted a quick fix. Oh yeah, because this may be something you are integrating for the rest of your life, especially if it's ego death experience. And making sure that they have a community and a friendly spaces to talk about. So there's different phases of using psychedelics. There's assessment, the prep, the experience, and integration. I'm just saying this for the clinicians, for you to go down a whole rabbit hole as to how to get some more training. There are actually some new tools to actually measure mystical experience and psychedelic integration scales. Those two scales are here. Contraindications, I'm going to share some resources there. Two of the best resources is the Microdosing Guidebook by CJ Spotswood. He is a psych nurse and has done, it's amazing what he's put together. Please get this book and have it, really have it. He messaged me today. He's like, if anybody needs a book, please let him know. It's amazing. We need this book for humanity, and this has saved so many people's lives by having this. This is a book for if someone's taking a medication, how that's going to look with psychedelics. There's a cheat sheet here. This is a page you want to come back to. As far as there's so many guides and supports that are out there, please look at them with medications. I cannot even articulate how important this is for harm reduction. The other really person you need to know as far as someone taking medications has a mental and physical health condition. Spirit pharmacist Ben Malcolm is a pharmacist, and he has a ton of training and free resource. Please go to his website, subscribe to his newsletter. He's saving lives. Both spirit pharmacists and CJ Spotwoods are saving lives through medication and harm reduction. Psychedelics aren't for everyone. They have an amplifying effect of current mood and mental health states and can increase anxiety and things like thought looping. It's not typically for folks with a history of psychosis, schizophrenia, although folks with schizophrenia, they're doing new research on microdosing, severe anxiety, heart issues, seizures, epilepsy. If overdone, psychedelics can lead to manic states, exacerbating underlying conditions, Please review your medications for certain medications for days and weeks prior to psychedelic experience. Have professional support if you have underlying mental, physical health condition or trauma. Most people come to psychedelics and they have undiagnosed PTSD, CPTSD. And it can create a worldview shift for folks for up to 6 months. Like you can go into it being very religious or even an atheist, and it totally shifts your world, which can be beautiful for some people and can be earth-shattering for other people to come out of the experience and like everything doesn't make sense in their life anymore. The way that they've been viewing the world is totally changed. Here's some resources. I want to make sure that I have time for like a couple minutes for questions. Opening that up. I zoomed through that, didn't I?
That's all right. A lot of information.
Yes.
Okay, so I do have a couple questions. I won't page of them, but I'll try to pick. So in terms of like how it actually works, so they go on this trip, but like what's going on while they're doing this? Like how is it actually helping their depression and their anxiety and their PTSD? Like how is are they having therapy during it? Are they just...
In the best case scenario, you're getting support and you're doing it with people. It's creating new neuroplasticity, new ways of being. It's creating a big state of mindfulness at a smaller dose. It's just creating some more mindfulness and some trauma release. They're very somatic. So a lot of people get very, very tired with a trauma history, or they may be more anxiety. And then they can start to feel and hear their thought patterns more viscerally, somatically within their body. And so they're like, oh, wow, when I do that, I'm feeling this. That's at a microdose level. At a macrodose level, you may not even be you. That's the best way that I can describe it. Or you may be fully in the part of yourself that you hate, or you may be revisiting trauma. And I do not recommend a macrodose for some people, because with skilled, precise assistance with like a shaman or a trauma I do recommend everyone be trauma informed. There are some folks that are integrating that aren't trauma informed, and I'm just not a fan of that whatsoever. That process actually moves through. You may have to fully engage in that part of yourself in order to come through it on the other side to get another viewpoint. Otherwise, you're going to still stay stuck. Or you may be re-experiencing your trauma from a altered state, and so that you can process that through your body with like a bufo or 5-MeO DMT. Someone may be finishing out 1,000 incomplete trauma responses as well, somatically, energetically. So it just depends from a micro to a macro what that looks like. And it is so individual, and it's based on the setting intention, underlying physiology, trauma history, ancestral trauma, collective trauma, the mushroom, the species, so specific.
You know, when you look at things like, for instance, research on marijuana, because it's federally illegal, there's not a lot of great research on a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Is that really one of the barriers here because of some of the legal issues, like doing specific studies to show improvement, for instance, in depression by PHQ-9 or other things like that?
Yeah, that's part of the hard problem. And that's where folks are still doing research where it's not legally approved on that. They're doing small research studies on certain populations with the best set of information that they know. And so they're doing some smaller studies to see that. And unfortunately, this is the sad part of research has been ongoing for thousands of years. Just because it hasn't been collected, we should be making ties to indigenous communities, because the way that they look at mental health is either someone is imbalanced or out of balance, and that is more accurate to the human condition. But unfortunately, the Western mindset as to how we look at mental health and how we pathologize like the human condition and what happens after trauma, we're missing that. And so there's not only is it like from a federal legal standpoint, it's also from a cultural standpoint. We've lost some of our humanity, even in the treatment.
Is there, when like you look back, or depending on how far back you go, to show that this actually can help people kind of get the jobs, maintain families, you know? That's kind of where I'm thinking, because what does that look like if we go back hundreds of years versus now, and how that actually changed changes their function. You know, if this is somebody who's severely depressed, like, does that actually translate into, you know, motivation in jobs and life and whatever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, it's different. It's a different cultural framework versus healing and group and ritual, which we don't have as part of like our part of Western culture. Like to your point, we don't have that. But it can create a sense of meaning shift. And so it might not going out and getting a job, but like being more aligned with like who they really are versus what trauma has caused them and cultural conditioning has caused them to be. And that could be creating the suffering. A lot of it is a meaning and an existential, because even if we're trying to treat the mental health, there's also this existential thread that comes through as to like, people start to ask the question, like, who am I? What does this all mean? How do I get into more rhythm? But there's oftentimes just more getting, when it's done correctly and safely, there's often more times just more rhythm into being a human and being more compassionate to the earth and your community.
You know, there was a kind of a question that was kind of very similar to mine from April about you know, addiction. And I guess my question would be, just like any substance or any medication that we use or anything, there's consequences sometimes that are unforeseen or side effects. And, you know, are there significant things you've run into that have been a problem that way, or addiction, or, you know, those types of things?
Well, it's really hard to get addicted to most psychedelics because they're such a long, and when you're doing large doses, where it can just be is folks try to do too much, too fast, too soon, and they don't realize like the trauma physiology, and that's where the harm is created. Can folks microdose too much? Yeah. And so they end up usually in a large experience because they add more and more and more. And then they're having like, they're trying to go to work and they're having like a mystical experience, right? Like they're out and about. And so that's kind of a danger there. Ketamine, there has been some addiction properties there where folks like, it's a dissociative. So people like dissociating, but then I don't want to pathologize what has caused that person to like dissociating. Like what has gone on in their life as to like, that's usually a trauma history. Right. And so ketamine, there has been shown some addiction properties, but when I look at the rest of them, it's pretty hard. It's just because we want to look at it in a way where folks are using them intentionally, because folks can overuse them. Yes, folks can overuse, and I see a lot of folks overusing psychedelics and not integrating. The integration piece is what's missed. So they'll get all this information as to how to heal, and then they'll go back in the community. There's no support. There's no one there. And they're like, well, nothing's changed. It's kind of like magical thinking. Well, everything should change. It's like, no, you've got to make the changes. And so they'll go back. So I wouldn't even call it addiction. It's just kind of a misunderstanding because they're coming at it from a Western mindset. I took the medicine, I should be better. It's just very, very different as to like, no, that you have to actually do the millions of steps as to what you were shown. And that's where someone has to be there to support them.
Sure. Yes, we are over time. So I just want to kind of be respectful of people's time. Are these slides accessible? Like, can we share these with our people?
Yeah, please do share them.
There's just a lot of questions about being able to click on all those links because there's a lot of links in there, and I think would be very helpful for people to be able to see.
Yeah, I'll send you, I can send out a copy.
Sure.
You have that and you can send it out. Yep.
Perfect.